that's just the role-related complications. These are seven contributors that, based on our experiences and our research and our years of talking with caregivers, what we call factors that contribute to relationship confusion. And we'll go through these. We'll go, we may not get through all of them, but what we will do is provide an opportunity for you to begin rewriting or rethinking some of these. So we really encourage you to make this very personal as we move forward. And you can share that if you want, or you can simply kind of map out what you're experiencing to better understand the hidden dimensions of the relationship confusions. Where do our notions and expectations come from, and how are they shaping how we're experiencing our relationships? So let's kind of jump in here to this first factor, which is, one of the challenges to identifying with this relationship that isn't really a relationship, but it's that caregivers can't specialize. That's a privilege to specialize in something. That's what we do in the public realm, right, Donna? We're not allowed to specialize when it comes to something in our private relational worlds, partly because take your primary relationship. So name it. What's your relationship prior to your loved one, prior to you becoming a caregiver? Go ahead and write that down. And then add the caregiver role and relationship. So you add that in there, okay? So we're already not specializing, right? Because we have now a primary relationship. We have a caregiver role that's added to that relationship. Oh yeah, by the way, many of us may also be employed and or having to negotiate other responsibilities that are necessary for upkeep, maintenance, shopping, pharmaceuticals, name it. These are necessary responsibilities that don't allow us simply to focus on these one-dimensional notions of care that other people might conceive of. And oh yeah, by the way, we are people. We also have a multiplicity of relationships, both familial and otherwise, that help maintain us, sustain us, give us our notions of self. And so, Donna, we're always negotiating these things. There's never one moment where you can focus only on the caregiver relationship, because that can't happen, because it's born out of this other relationship surrounded by a context of other relationships.
Yes. And I mean, and the fact too is that even though that is true, all of that is true, we do know that in terms of caregiver identity, the way that time works and the time that you actually spend on any of these domains, caregiving can actually eclipse some of these other relationships and areas of relationships. So you might have to, there might come a time where you have to quit your job. So there might come a time when you say, you find that suddenly you're saying no to every invitation from friends. Mm-hmm. You can't even remember what the pre-existing relationship was. And that pie of you is now almost completely full of caregiving. And of course, if you add on to this, what you were talking about before, Zachary, nostalgia, I long for the life before. I pine for the life after caregiving. And I cannot make peace with what's going on right now. So I think this idea that you cannot specialize in any one of these areas, because as we say in the book, caregiving infiltrates every other sphere and every other relationship. So.
It does. It's always encroaching, because the duties and responsibilities are so clear and focused. And if you don't do that for your son or your parent, then it doesn't get done. And there's real consequences. And so it's messy and it's always complicated, much more complex than others might be able to realize. But from within the role itself, I think it's important that we realize that there's a totality of the care experience that makes it complicated. It might inform, the notion of resentment that we were talking about a few minutes ago. And related to this, the idea that we have multiple identities. And so this goes right after this idea of, I would like our participants to just name, that pre-existing relationship. And all of us today are probably also a caregiver. So it's name what it was that it was born out of. All care in an informal world is born out of and from something. And it's that pre-existing relationship. So go ahead, you're naming it. And then put that and, because the and, well, this complicates it when we have an and in there, doesn't it? Because then the blurring of lines and the challenging roles that might compete with each other, encroach on one another, contradict one another, transgress one another's. And we're going to try to figure out how that happens here in a second. So we have those. Our challenge to all of us is, write out, just jot down some notes about your two scripts. So if you are a parent, what's that script? Just write out what you think are like the dominating features that inform that script, as if you were an actor and you were going to, you need to know how to perform that role. How do you embody that? And then what are the dominant features of your particular caregiver role, right? So, you're very rarely, Donna, do we actually write out the scripts that are in our head. And I think that's one of the takeaways that we would like people to get today, is to put those on paper so you can begin making sense of them in ways that are different than in your head.
Yeah. It's so funny. My girlfriend, who is a caregiver, a longtime caregiver, got stopped by the police for speeding, and she was having a really bad day. And I can't remember what the police asked her, something like, what do you do, or where were you going because you were speeding? And my friend said, I am a mother, I am a nurse, I am a chef, I am a driver. She kind of lost it. The guy did not give her a ticket because he felt so sorry for her, but she went on with the role, I am all of these things, and I am doing too much right now.
Life happens in the and, isn't it? Because it can't be an either or. It is a mixing and a both and kind of quality to it that so many of us, even ourselves, we don't acknowledge. So as we have that written out, you just have a couple notes perhaps, okay? Now we want you to kind of think about how some of these relationships that we just highlighted, these primary identities that are part of the caregiver relationship, your pre-existing relationship that got you into the caregiving situation, and then the caregiving role and relationship. So obviously narrow in on how these might be competing. So not only, Donna, are they and, but sometimes they are versus. And I can guarantee you this, people outside of our group today aren't thinking about the versus part. They're not thinking about how they might be antagonistic at times, how they may complicate one another at times, how they may simply be totally antagonistic. So think for a moment, you have the two primary identities scripted out in brief. Now we're thinking about them in the context of competing. Here's the question we want to ask you is, which aspects of the two scripts that you just jotted down might be in conflict? Which parts or aspects of those two scripts? If you are a spouse and a caregiver, is there one dominant aspect that might be in conflict? There's nothing wrong if they are in conflict. In fact, that's inevitable. I think the more we deny that there may be occasional conflicts or significant and overwhelming conflicts, we're denying the ways in which we might be able to negotiate those, at least in our own ways of understanding our roles. Yeah.
It's something, I remember quite clearly when the actor Christopher Reeve had his spinal cord injury, and his wife, bless her, they were beautiful people, as they appeared to be anyway. I was interested in knowing about them and reading about their experience with needing care and giving care. And I remember that his wife said, we are incredibly privileged to be able to say this, but I have taken a decision. We, Christopher Reeve and me, his wife, have taken the decision that I will not be his nurse. I will continue to be his wife. And I thought, wow, that's privilege. And what does that even look like? And how do you deal with that emotionally? I wanted to know. Because if you're bathing your spouse, that's a place where most married people do not want to be. It's not the way things are supposed to be. It's not a picture of a romantic relationship. And how can you move from that to a romantic relationship? And yet, how can you turn away and say that I am a good spouse and I have refused to do it? These are very complicated questions.
It's superbly complicated, and it is a source of ongoing conflict from the many, many interviews that we've conducted for the book. That was one recurring one for spousal caregivers in particular. But it also, maybe it's a child and child caring for their parent, or a parent caring for their child, and the child is growing and becoming an adult, and yet maybe physically incapable. And yet, so the notions of kind of privacy, the notions of respecting one's space become really challenging, and those might conflict with what a traditional so-called parent or child script might be. So name the conflict or conflicts. I think that's really important. There's nothing wrong if you name the conflict. It's simply providing perhaps a point of insight.